At the Australia Institute, we're big fans and followers of parliamentary procedure, and so we understand what an enormous privilege it is to appear before a parliamentary committee like this one. But it was quite a surprise to be invited here at this stage of the political cycle by a government-led committee to give my opinion on the opposition's energy policy, particularly a policy that's been investigated essentially so many times before. Anyhow, here we are, and here's my opinion. Nuclear energy is not suitable for Australia. Starting at the end, there is no permanent solution for disposing of nuclear waste. I had considerable involvement in the South Australian Royal Commission and associated processes, and it became very clear during that time that it costs a lot of money to permanently store nuclear waste. Nobody wants it on their land, and this adds considerably to the costs of nuclear power. Speaking of costs, let's move to the start. The upfront costs of nuclear energy are very, very large and very, very uncertain. This is fundamentally why no investors are keen to build it in Australia, and even Australia's main electricity consumers, like the Tomago aluminium smelter, don't want to see it built here. As somebody who's spent a lot of time looking at economic modelling and critiquing other people's modelling, including levelised cost calculations, I've been somewhat bemused by the attention that levelised cost calculations have attracted in the last year or so. No amount of fiddling around with levelised cost formulas is going to change the fact that the capital costs of nuclear are very, very high and very, very uncertain. So if we've done the end with the waste and the start with the capital costs, the middle is also pretty problematic for nuclear energy. It's unsuitable for the Australian electricity market, which is characterised by peaks and troughs rather than movement around a stable baseline. Of course, leaving the economics aside, nuclear energy is banned in Australia, and the ban on nuclear developments is extremely good public policy. It prevents huge amounts of rent-seeking and money-wasting projects and proposals being funded and wasting the public's time and resources. If only we had a similar ban on carbon capture and storage investigations or hydrogen export projects, the Australian public would be vastly better served. So I said it was a surprise to be invited here, which got me thinking of why have we been invited here? Clearly, the government likes talking about nuclear energy and it likes talking about the opposition's policy. Why does the government like this so much? Because I think the government would far rather talk about the opposition's energy policy than its own policy failings. Last year, fossil fuel subsidies cost Australians $14.5 billion. We've seen the approval of new coal and gas projects in recent times, despite the overwhelming opinions and evidence from the International Energy Agency, climate scientists and other bodies that no new coal and gas projects should be developed. Yet just last week we had the resource minister in Japan promoting new gas projects. I think the government would rather talk about the opposition's policy than the various offset scandals.
Excuse me, Mr Campbell, I'd like you to refer back to the terms of reference, please, because this is not on the terms of reference. So if you could please refer back to those with your commentary, that would be much appreciated.
Very well. Well, to finish up, I think both major parties would rather have a straw man fight about nuclear versus renewable rather than really concentrating on phasing out fossil fuels, which is what climate science demands.
Thank you there, Mr Campbell, for your opening remarks. You brought up earlier around the fact that you've made an inquiry before into another inquiry that was on into nuclear power. In 2018, the Australian Institute submitted to the previous inquiry into nuclear power of the House, chaired by the now Deputy Chair, in that you said that if nuclear power operators were made to adequately insure against the risk of nuclear accidents, the insurance premiums would make nuclear power completely uneconomical. Could you please elaborate on those comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Insurance as an industry and as an economic function is about pooling risk and about assessing known risks and spreading that risk around a community. And the small likelihood of catastrophic failure of nuclear facilities is something that insurance companies globally have had a lot of problems with. So insuring nuclear facilities is clearly problematic.
Would that be an issue for residents around that area too, say farms or people residing close to that nuclear power station, do you think?
I haven't researched this myself in detail, but any facility that's not adequately insured potentially imposes a risk on its neighbours and other affected parties.
No worries, thank you. In an article from September, Matt Saunders from the Australian Institute says that the increased use of renewables in supplying electricity is not the cause of higher retail electricity prices, and it is clear that more renewables will lead to lower prices. Could the Institute please expand on this, on these comments?
So, in the time we have available, what most directly affects retail electricity prices in Australia is retailers. Retailers and distribution of energy makes up the bulk of electricity prices paid by households. To the extent that increasing supply of electricity in the wholesale market pushes down retail prices, it seems that increasing renewable supply or increasing any kind of supply, assuming that it's competitive within the market, will help to, as they say, apply downward pressure on prices. But there's a lot more to the energy price sausage than just wholesale market prices.
What's the Australian Institute's view on how long it will take if Australia decides to go down the nuclear pathway? If you consider the legislation required at a state and territory level, safety and environmental frameworks required, community engagement and construction period, what are the expected timelines of seeing a nuclear facility that can produce power in this country?
Yeah, I haven't done research onto that myself. I don't have a particular number in mind. But it'd certainly be a long time. I've seen estimates, and I've earlier seen the committee discussing various estimates. We're looking at least a decade and probably into the 2040s. I mean, to be honest, I don't think it'll ever happen. So nailing down a particular number is difficult.
Can I just ask why you don't think it'll actually happen?
Because I don't think this is a genuine proposal. And there's, I think the proposal to build nuclear power in Australia is fundamentally politically driven. There's no appetite for it from investors. You don't see the major electricity companies in Australia lining up to build nuclear power. You don't see the major international nuclear companies wanting to enter Australia. They don't want to do that because of the nature of the Australian electricity market, because it is characterised by peaks and troughs that nuclear reactors have difficulty responding to. So with no real investor demand and I would argue really politically driven proposals behind the policy positions that we're seeing here, I don't really see this as a genuine effort to build nuclear power stations in Australia. I see this as a distraction from genuine action on climate and energy.
So the Australian Institute thinks this is just smoke and mirrors?
Yeah,
pretty much. Thank you for your time, Mr Campbell. Deputy Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks for being here today. Under Labor and the market operators plan for a net zero electricity grid as reflected in the market operators integrated system plan. What is the total system cost of getting to net zero based on that renewables only plan?
I don't know. I haven't researched that.
But aren't you arguing that including nuclear as part of the mix would be more expensive than that?
It would be more expensive. Adding nuclear generation into the Australian electricity market would be more expensive than equivalent capacity from other technologies.
You're talking coal and gas?
Talking anything.
So renewables. So you haven't.
Statement.
So the Australian Institute, you actually haven't studied the real cost of the existing plan being implemented in Australia to get to a net zero grid. Is that right?
I mean, the Australian Institute has published various bits of research. I mean, we haven't published the ISP. That's AEMO.
That wasn't my question. You started off.
What is your question?
You started off explaining that you've spent a lot of time doing modelling. So, do you know what the total system cost is for Labor's plan to get to net zero by 2050?
No, I've never modelled that.
Okay. So, yet you're confident that a renewables-only grid will bring prices down. Well, what then, going back to your, in your words, spending lots of time modelling, take me through the economic modelling you've done to demonstrate that a renewables-only grid will bring prices down.
So I've done a lot of economic modelling through my career. I haven't done much of it on the NEM itself and the ISP.
How have you drawn that conclusion then if you haven't?
Because, as I said at the top, you don't need to do a lot of modelling to see that capital costs of nuclear energy are really high and really uncertain. And because of the uncertainty around them, nobody wants to finance them in Australia.
So what premium do you put on uncertainty in your economic models for such assets?
So I don't build such economic models.
I thought you said you do a lot of economic modelling.
I do, and that's why I've looked at these debates over is nuclear power expensive or not, with some degree of bemusement. It absolutely is expensive. The capital costs are huge, and they're uncertain.
What other factors go into a total system cost analysis over and above capital cost up front?
So just to finish my answer here, capital costs are big.
You're not providing an answer to a question I've asked, sir.
No, I'm trying to finish.
You've made your point that you think there are high upfront capital costs.
And there's high decommissioning costs.
So my question is, when you do a total system cost analysis, which ultimately impacts the price paid by consumers and businesses in Australia, what other variables do you take into account based on your many years of economic modelling?
So all the years of economic modelling in the world don't change the fundamental fact that
wasn't my question, sir.
That
what other variables? Can you name one other variable, sir? One other variable of doing an economic model for an electricity grid.
Deputy Chair, please let him answer his question too. You've asked him 4 times.
You seriously want me to sit here and talk about what are particular line items and what goes into an economic model around electricity prices?
What I'm trying to understand to answer your question for clarity, Mr Campbell, is you've come in here today and said the Australia Institute believes that a renewables-only grid is going to get prices down. You've based that on your opening remarks of how much economic modelling you've done in your life, but you cannot tell me how much it's going to cost under the existing plan to get to net zero by the market operator. You have not studied that, and now you can't even tell me the variables that would even go into such an economic model. So I'm questioning on what basis you stand here today, or you sit here now, saying the prices are going to go down. And so here's a question for you. So under questioning last week in a Senate hearing, Daniel Westerman, who's the head of the Australian energy market operator, he couldn't guarantee that energy prices would be lower under the current energy roadmap, which is, of course, described as a renewables-only one. So you obviously have a very different view from the market operator, but you haven't actually done the economic modelling. So can you just explain why your view is different from the market operators?
I'm not sure. I didn't listen to the testimony from the market operator, and I'm not sure that our views are actually particularly different. All the modelling trickery in the world can't change the facts that no one wants to build nuclear in Australia. No one wants to build nuclear in Australia because of its upfront costs, its inability to compete in the national electricity market as it's currently set up, and the huge decommissioning costs. No one. We don't need to go through complicated economic modelling to get to this point. It's pretty simple.
Let me ask a question if I can. In other countries where nuclear energy is not illegal, there is an increase in appetite for building nuclear energy plants. And in fact, a recent report by the United States Department of Energy showed that compared to a renewables-only grid, a grid that has renewables plus nuclear actually is cheaper, to the tune of about 37%. And they did that in the context of California. So do you believe that your economic theory on this applies to the rest of the world or just Australia where it's illegal?
I'm not familiar with the study you're talking about, but the fundamental problem in Australia is nuclear is expensive to build, can't compete in the market, and expensive to decommission.
Do you agree that nuclear is a clean energy source?
The word "clean's" doing a lot of work there. I mean, it produces waste for which there's...
Is it a zero emissions nuclear energy source?
Well, it's not a zero emissions energy source. Considerable emissions go into the...
Compared to, let's say, wind and solar, for example.
Considerable emissions are generated in the construction...
Compared to wind and solar.
Considerable emissions are generated in the construction and the construction of nuclear power plants, the mining and processing and transport of fuels and decommissioning, etc. But
compared to wind and solar. Sorry, so I've asked you a question.
Can you please let him finish his question, Deputy Chair?
Well, I need him to answer the question, not provide questions, Chair.
The original question was, do I think nuclear is a clean energy source? Let's go with one-word answers. No.
So, if indeed under your plan and the market operator's plan...
I don't have a plan, Deputy Chair.
So do you support the market operator's plan?
I don't support or not support. I'm not here to comment on... This isn't an inquiry into the market operator's plan.
What are you here for?
Well, you asked me here. You tell me.
So you don't have a plan, you don't know the market operator's plan, so you actually don't know the current energy transition underway in Australia. You claim to be an economic modeller, but you've done none of the economic modelling. You haven't even looked at the market operator's economic modelling. So
I'm not going to waste my time looking at going deep into the weeds of various economic models when the question is a simple one. Is nuclear energy expensive and unsuitable for the Australian energy market and for the Australian energy policy situation? It is unsuitable.
So does the Australia Institute...
That's the conclusion of inquiries that you've chaired, inquiries...
With due respect, it's
Royal
not.
Commission in South Australia...
It's not, but I appreciate your opinion, sir. So does the Australia Institute, which clearly supports the ongoing rollout of renewables-only grid, by all modelling provided, including the market operator, which is supported by the current government, that's going to rely heavily on fossil fuels to support long periods of low wind and sun. So do you support the use of fossil fuels to complement and firm up renewables?
Oh, I support a phase-out of fossil fuel.
That was my question.
I mean, do I support it today? Yes, absolutely I do. Do I support it for 2050? No, I'd rather not see fossil fuels being a part of the Australian energy mix in 2050.
So even
will there be a phase out during that period?
Sorry, you're asking yourself your own questions, if you don't mind, sir. So even those who support the basic premise of a renewables-only grid like you, they concede Australia is going to need a lot more gas, which is a fossil fuel.
No, I don't.
And so,
I certainly don't agree with that at all.
You don't agree, but you've never done any economic modelling on it, have you?
Have you
got an energy sector background? I'm just trying to wonder at what angle I can come and ask you questions.
Yeah, I'm a resource economist by background.
Resource economist, okay. So if even the market operator is wrong about the need for more gas as you bring in more renewables, what's the solution? Well, what do you do?
Storage.
Right. So please explain how that would work, that we wouldn't actually have any more gas.
Yeah, so when it's not raining outside, our taps still turn on water because we store water in dams.
And how many dams would we need in Australia holding what sort of capacity of water? Understanding you may not know the specifics, but just broadly speaking.
That was an analogy, Deputy Chair.
I'm sorry.
When it's not raining, our water taps still work. When the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, with energy storage, our electricity plugs will still work.
And given this is my last question, and you started on your background doing lots of economic modelling, if there is no gas and you're reliant entirely on storage, what would be the impact on the cost of the system and therefore the price to consumers and businesses?
So today, tomorrow, next week, of course there'll be gas in the system.
No, that wasn't my question, sir.
Yeah, but
I didn't ask you whether there's going to be gas in the system today or tomorrow.
So you're talking in 15, 20 years' time when gas has been phased out of the system?
Let's say 2050. Let's say 2050. So under your view, there is no gas, there is no nuclear, there is only renewables and storage.
Yeah, that's what I think, and that's what climate science demands.
I asked you a question, sir. What would be the likely impact on cost and therefore the price impact for consumers and for businesses based on what you are putting forward as the solution?
But compared to what? Compared to a world where we had developed the 7 coal-fired power stations that were proposed for the Latrobe Valley? Or
what do we say compared to... You asked me a question to clarify, and I'll clarify for you. Why don't we say compared to Labor's current plan, which assumes gas?
So what would the difference be to... I mean, I think your questions are disingenuous in asking for specific dollar figures around specific...
Indicative is fine,
specific
sir.
hypothetical future
Indicative is fine,
comparisons.
given you've put forward an alternate solution to the Labor Party's approach. You want to see no fossil fuels.
Anyone who's serious about climate change wants to see no fossil fuels.
So are you going to answer the question? What is the cost impact, therefore the impact on prices for consumers and businesses?
Of what relative to what?
Of the proposal you put forward, where there is no gas, only storage, compared to the Australian Energy Market Operators Plan, which still includes gas come 2050. Again, I don't want a specific dollar figure, just talk in terms of generalities. Is it more expensive? Less expensive? Therefore, would the impact on consumers be higher prices or lower prices? Just at that level, given your many years of economic modelling.
Given my many years of economic modelling, I know how fraught predictions are in 2024 about hypothetical situations in 2050. It's a fool's errand to be making such predictions. And look at how technology has been changing and improving around battery storage. I'd like to highlight some great research we've done on the ability of buildings to store energy. and the potential for off-peak hot water to be used to store energy. There's been so many improvements happening in energy storage that the idea of sitting here in 2024 and having these hypothetical, what does one proposal differ, how does that differ from another, it's not useful. Energy storage is advancing rapidly. Nuclear energy has not declined in cost or utility, and I really think this whole discussion's a distraction from talking about the need to phase out fossil fuel subsidies and fossil fuel expansion in Australia.
Thank you, Mr Campbell, and thank you, Deputy
Thanks,
Chair. We're going in circles here. Mr Perrott.
Thank you very much, Mr Campbell. I'm sorry I missed part of your presentation. Well, I was just interested if the Australian Institute had any information on private capital investing in nuclear around the world. You seem to suggest that it wasn't. I just wondered if that was based on anything. And surely if nuclear is delivers a steady income stream, I thought it would be a haven for private capital seeking that long-term investment. Do you have any information on that at all?
You talk about why is private capital reluctant to invest in nuclear energy in Australia? I think private capital would tend to be a bit more nimble than governments. Is my proposition. And so why isn't it going where there is a good steady return? What does it know that the opposition doesn't? Yeah, I think it's the high capital costs, the uncertainty around capital costs, the uncertainty as to how and if nuclear power can compete within any electricity market, really, with renewable energy becoming much cheaper and altering the amount of electricity that's demanded at different times of the day. So uncertainty around costs, uncertainty around demand, uncertainty around rehabilitation and decommissioning costs, I think is the reason why you don't see a lot of investors in Australia lining up to build nuclear energy.
Can you I know your title says Australian Institute, but do you have any data on the global movement towards investing in nuclear for comparison purposes? And I know our grid is unique to this continent. We are a large continent with a small population and all the extra challenges that come with our electricity network, or our electricity networks, can I say?
Yeah. Look, I haven't done a lot of research on international investment patterns, no.
No, okay. No, I just thought you might have come across it. And I think I've been lobbied by the nuclear industry. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Uranium industry. I've been an MP since 2007. I have been lobbied by the uranium industry in the past, but I don't think seems to be much. I don't think I've ever been lobbied by the nuclear industry. You haven't come across them in your travels?
I've looked at quite a few uranium mine proposals, which have generally not proceeded. They've generally needed pretty high uranium prices to go ahead. I haven't looked at this for a while, but I think a lot of them needed $60 a pound over the long term, which until recently certainly hadn't been on the cards.
But that jurisdictions where it is legal to have uranium, there's not many parts.
Those projects are in Western Australia that I looked at and haven't gone ahead. I think
they weren't legal, but they just weren't able to. The capital cost didn't justify digging it out of the ground.
Yeah, that's right. The uranium price wasn't high enough to proceed with those projects. I think one point I would make, it's often claimed that Australia has a large proportion of the world's uranium and therefore Australia should use it. I think what's overlooked is Australia doesn't have a large proportion of the cheap and easy to get out uranium in the world, and that's why we haven't really seen a lot of uranium mining go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Any comment? Sorry, Chair, can I just ask, in terms of Australian mining operations, I got the impression it was a unique combination of resources that made it economically viable rather than like a normal mines in, say, Africa.
Sorry, I just missed the question there.
I thought like you can have a copper mine that produces uranium rather than a uranium mine producing uranium in terms of being economically viable in Australia, in terms of a large earth-moving operation,
Yeah, so I know the examples that leap to mind are Olympic Dam in South Australia, which produces some amount of uranium, copper, and I think a range of other products as well. Whereas the projects I've looked at in the past were more pure uranium projects in Western Australia. Okay,
all right. And that's your area of expertise initially in terms of resources economics, is that what you said?
Mining, coal mining, major project assessment, cost-benefit analysis are more my background.
Yeah, all right. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Perrott. Mr Burnell.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got a few questions, and I do want to say thank you, Mr Campbell, for providing evidence today.
Thank you.
Is a proposed nuclear plan consistent with meeting net zero emissions by 2050?
I mean, entirely in isolation, it shouldn't really make a difference. But of course it makes a difference because economists love to say, ceteris paribus, other things being equal. If everything else was equal, then it shouldn't matter. But other things aren't equal. Other parts of the energy industry, other parts of Australia's policy community will of course respond to a decision to build a nuclear reactor. Hypothetically, if a decision was taken to build a nuclear reactor in Australia, and that was taken with some degree of certainty, that would definitely affect the rollout of renewable energy and the phase out of fossil fuels in Australia. There's no shortage of people who've remarked on that, and I think including the parts of the energy industry and the coal industry have made that pretty clear. So in that sense, no, it is not consistent with a zero emissions future in Australia.
Is that one reason why the private capital may be reluctant to invest in nuclear, given both major parties say they are committed to net zero emissions by 2050 and that target is legislated in Australia?
I think that's one reason, but I think the overwhelming economic case against nuclear energy in Australia... sorry, let me phrase that a different way. The economic case against nuclear energy in Australia is so overwhelming that I think climate considerations would be secondary.
Okay. I want to take you back to your opening statement and specifically the end that was at the start. So when you were talking about permanent storage of waste, you made mention of the citizens' jury in South Australia as part of the broader nuclear waste discussion. Can you just step me through some of the complications that came up through that process as far as social licence was considered with the South Australian public?
Yeah, so I certainly don't speak for the South Australian public, and certainly not the South Australian Indigenous community. But one thing, as an outsider who visited South Australia several times and was involved in those citizens' juries, one thing that struck me was the absolute unanimity of First Nations people against proposals for nuclear waste disposal on their traditional lands. And I also remember one young woman at the end of one session in the citizens' jury saying to me, so basically this is all about the money. We'd only do this for the money. And I was like, yeah, that's right. South Australia would only import the rest of the world's nuclear waste if there was vast amounts of money in it for South Australia. There was no benefit in terms of energy production or jobs or royalties or anything like that. The proposal was based on a suggestion that there was heaps of money in it for South Australia. And my examination of the economic modelling that was commissioned by the Royal Commission showed that no, that there wasn't a lot of money there. It was based on a lot of very flawed assumptions, my favourite being that the model included a lot on what countries would send what volumes of waste to South Australia. And it included an estimate for the volume of waste that that the Ukraine might send to South Australia. And I made an appointment to go and see the Ukrainian embassy, and I asked the ambassador straight, would the Ukraine ever send nuclear waste to Australia? And he laughed and said no. And I was surprised because you don't usually get a straight answer out of diplomats. And I said, oh, why is that? And he said, because we have a very good place for nuclear waste in the Ukraine. It's called Chernobyl. And they have a waste disposal, a nuclear waste storage facility there in Chernobyl for obvious reasons. The contamination risk is already there and negated. So yeah, I spent a fair bit of time looking at the economics of nuclear waste disposal as part of that Royal Commission process. And it's difficult. It's hard. It hasn't really been done anywhere in the world. Various attempts have been made to do it. Most of them have ended in tears. And it wasn't a good idea for South Australia then, and I'd say it remains not a good idea for Australia today.
When you talk about the difficulty, is that from a geological location point of view, from a build cost point of view, from social licence point of view, all of them rolled in together? What makes it so difficult to find a suitable site and actually deliver one? We've been having the debate about nuclear waste storage in this country for over 50 years and failed to land on an absolute decision. Why is it so complicated?
Look, I'm an economist, so you should really ask engineers and geologists about that. But certainly there's a facility in the US that they've had a few goes at setting up, and there's inevitably something always, well, it's not inevitable, but something always seems to crack, and the efforts are abandoned, usually at considerable cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennell. Unfortunately, we've came to time there, Mr. Campbell.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.